All right, welcome back to Hardline. I'm Chip Zdarsky. First of all, thanks for joining us for this in
Who,
the
me?
pandemic. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, you.
okay. Wait, is there a camera on me? Are you a
Yes,
spy? Are you a
basically.
spy?
Yeah, yeah. The camera on your computer, everyone sees you. That's what I've been told.
I have a piece of tape so I can go like this.
Oh, nice. Yeah, my wife does that too. I'm too much of an exhibitionist to do it. I kind of like the thought that people
Oh,
are secretly watching
I
me.
kind of know that about you. I know just from your Twitter feed.
Oh, that's fair. That's fair. Yeah. Yeah. Well, when you've got all this, you want to show it off as much as possible. Yeah. So thanks for doing this. It's a 10 questions format.
Okay.
So I'm going to try and hit the 10 questions, but digressions will happen. We've met twice before, at a comic show, CXC, and a Marvel party. And you're the only person that I've ever been nervous to meet in comics, or
Uh,
probably out of comics as well. Like, I think your Daredevil run and Kid Eternity were just like legendary. They
Thank
were like
you.
a breath of fresh air in a kind of a stale industry. But when you got into Marvel, it was as an editor. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So how did you transition from editor to writer? And also, when that happened, uh, who did you end up empathizing with more, editors or writers, once you
Well,
transitioned?
actually, I think I started writing before I became an editor.
Okay.
I was hired by, through the Village Voice. When you hit the city in the 80s, you
Yeah.
got the Village Voice and you found an apartment, a job, and a boyfriend.
Yeah.
All three. Like boom, boom, boom.
It's amazing.
Anyway, there was an ad in the paper for editorial work wanted, and I didn't know what kind of editorial work.
Hmm.
And I went up and realized it was, I saw these paper cutouts of Spider-Man and Captain America, I think.
And then it
And I
kind of
went
tweaked.
I went into Jim Shooter's office and I started talking about Warhol and Lichtenstein and pop culture and all this total crap. And I remember I was reading Henry Miller at the time.
Oh yeah.
And in one of his books, I think it's Rosy Crucifixion, he tells a story about how worthless he felt and how like he'd never get published. And he quotes, I think it says, I'm 33 years old, failure in every sense of the word, age of Christ crucified, a failure in every sense of the word. And then he goes into this building and he goes up to the top floor and he just cons executives. So that was the spirit of me going up to the top. Well, we were on the 10th floor, I think,
Yeah.
Marvel Comics, and just landing a bunch of like arty bullshit on Jim Shooter. And he went, "You're hired."
I feel like almost every job interview feels like you're conning somebody. I don't think I've ever had a
Yeah.
job interview where it just kind of felt like a straightforward thing.
Well, humans are hustlers. We're all hustlers.
Yeah. So
We just don't really admit it most.
It's true. It's true. It's in my blood. So you became an editor. You worked on the X-Men titles for a long time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Well, I was Shooter's assistant, and Denny O'Neil gave me my first story, which
okay.
was for Bizarre Adventures. And I don't think I was an editor yet. I think I was still, they didn't even call us personal assistants back then. I was a
Yeah.
secretary. I was a lampshade headed for, as Gail Simone said, the refrigerator.
Whenever I think of like Secretary 1980s, I just think of Melanie Griffith and Working Girl.
Oh, yeah.
So
Okay.
that's what I've got in my mind right now. So how did the job of Daredevil come about then?
Well, Ralph Macchio, who's a wonderful editor,
Mm-hmm.
he was looking for someone, and honestly, that's 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So you can't really trust anything I say, but I'm pretty sure no one wanted to touch Daredevil. So I think Ralph probably called up all the best writers and said, "You want to write Daredevil?" And everyone went, Frank Miller just finished a legendary run. I ain't touching that,
Yeah.
because how can you follow that act? And being brand new to the business and really naive, I said, sure, I'll try. So
Yeah.
I wrote an issue and I don't even know if I was that aware at the time that Ralph was basically trying out a bunch of writers.
Yeah,
He
of
had
course.
like 3 or 4 writers writing plots,
Hmm.
and we didn't know we were in competition with each other. And I wrote a story, and he liked it, and we sent it to Barry Windsor Smith, and he drew it, and
That's
you know.
that's not a bad first artist.
In other words, I had nothing to do with it. Probably the other writers were much better, but Barry Windsor Smith, you know,
It elevates
yeah,
everything.
he lifted me above all those highly more qualified writers than
Yeah,
myself.
I don't think people realize exactly how much an artist elevates a story.
Yes,
Uh,
well, we're nothing without them.
yeah,
Absolutely nothing. We're
yeah,
nothing. We're like little bugs.
yeah. So following Miller's run, like up to that point, the title didn't really have a huge legacy. Like when I came on board as writer, I was following Miller, you, Brubaker, Wade, Bendis. Like it feels like a huge legacy title now, but at the time, the legacy was pretty strictly Miller. Um,
Yes,
so
yeah.
yeah, there was a sense of liberation then instead of
I mean,
crushing.
I think for me, because I was coming at comics from a different angle, I was a
Mhm.
frustrated journalist, and Denny
Yeah.
O'Neil, who was my kind of mentor, who encouraged me to write my first story
Hmm.
and every story, he was always, because he wrote documentary style comics, he brought
Yeah.
real world issues right from the street into his comics, and I became a fan of just the way he talked about comics. So
Hmm.
it really just inspired me to walk around the streets of Hell's Kitchen and look around and steal everything I could
Yeah.
steal. Like, there's a skateboard kid, write it down.
Yeah.
There's a legal aid clinic, write it down. And then I would literally sit on benches and eavesdrop
Yeah.
and just listen and take notes. And John Romita Jr., he was out there, like, he would come into the office and say, I just saw this dude, and I think we should have an African American villain, and we should call him Shotgun. And I'd say, okay, what's his name again? Shotgun. Okay, what do you think he is? Okay, it was
Yeah.
very much more of like a Stanley, Jack Kirby kind of thing back then, where the artist would come right into the office. We'd yak in Ralph's
Hmm.
office, and Ralph would pipe in, that's ridiculous, that's stupid. And he would, basically I would always go, oh, okay, and follow Ralph's command.
Yeah.
And we made, that's really how it happened. I don't think that I think I just brought my own thing.
Yeah. And then having like you and John Romita Jr. live in New York and kind of breathe that air, um, it reminds me a lot of how people say, like, if you're not British, you can't write John Constantine.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
British and working class, basically. And with Daredevil, it feels like between you and Miller, like those were the kind of the runs that felt the most like New York at the time.
yeah.
Uh,
you know
and
I,
that can't
I
be
must
replicated now.
No, because that New York is gone.
Yeah.
And I was actually reading your run, which I adore, and I
Oh,
love
wow,
how
thanks.
you. But yeah, are you kidding? I love how you brought the crime family back in, and I love how that scene where they trick, you know, Matt walks into dinner and realizes he's having dinner with the mob. I thought that scene was great.
Oh, thanks. I mean, I'm picking up a lot of threads that you laid down. Like, I kind of want to have like bigger questions that maybe aren't being answered in, say, Spider-Man or Fantastic
Yeah,
Four.
yeah,
Though I mean, one of the most legendary issues that you wrote was the Human Torch issue of Daredevil that had no Daredevil in it, and
yeah,
it's my favorite Fantastic Four story, and it's a single issue of Daredevil.
yeah.
But it goes in a lot deeper. Like everything you did on that title went so much deeper into issues and characterization than anything that Marvel was doing at the time. Um, it, the fact that it was all so profound and spiritual and political. Um, were you left to your own devices? Like, how much did you have to plan out for Ralph's sake? And was there internal pushback on what you were doing on the title?
I mean, I think it was completely collaborative. Ralph,
Mhm.
I ran every single plot by Ralph, and Ralph is a really sharp guy.
Mhm.
And he's really sharp in the sense that he never, I don't even to this day really know what his politics are.
Yeah.
But he always edited story. Was the story fun? Did it
Yeah.
make sense? Did it hit all the right beats? Did it he never tried to stop me from doing from and obviously he let me get away with a lot.
Mhm.
And I think that I always admit that I've always had a problem with fight scenes. It's funny, I was being interviewed the other day and someone said, well, you're a left-wing anti-violence thing. And
Yeah.
I went, I didn't realize that anti-violence was a left thing. I thought it was sort of everybody is against violence.
Yeah, like leftist revolution is
Yeah,
can be quite
exactly.
violent.
It's nonviolent. And it was sort of like, I think I always wanted Daredevil to find a way. In fact, maybe you can do this story. I used to
Write
pitch
this
this.
down.
I used to pitch this to Ralph. I'd say, Ralph, I'm not comfortable with fight scenes because a comic narrative escalates to violence. No
Mhm.
matter what, you have to figure out if even if it's a meet cute,
Yeah.
boom, Thanos steps on Spider-Man's toe, or something, you
The
know.
ultimate meet cute.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
ultimate meet cute. So I used to say to Ralph, I just want to have one issue of Daredevil where he uses his peace negotiator skills and there's no fight. And I think that's the only time Ralph said no. He said, no, you can't do
Yeah.
an action adventure comic and have no fight. And I said, just once, please. And he went, no. So I think
Yeah.
that's where Daredevil's fighting Bullet, and Johnny and I talked about how we would just have him crash through a peace rally, an
Yeah.
anti-nuke rally, as a our way of saying, you know, we're giving you a really violent fight, but we don't really believe in violence. And it's funny because
Yeah.
that's like it reminded me of, remember the Hollywood Code and the pre-code Hollywood,
Yeah.
and all the when they set the code and said people can't be seen in bed together. One foot always has to be on the
Mhm.
floor. You actually get a lot of clever stuff out of that restriction
Yeah.
because
100%.
people are, yeah. So, like when Spencer Tracy says to Kate Hepburn, here's your hat, what's your hurry? She's basically saying, yeah, we slept together because
Yeah.
we couldn't show it in the movie. You know,
Yeah, exactly.
that was a very long winded answer. Sorry.
Well, it's interesting because like the theme of violence is the one that I'm trying to play with right now, and talking about like not having a fight scene and kind of being anti-violence. Like it reached the culmination, and it was perfectly placed in your run when Matt Murdock goes to hell with everyone, and the way he defeats the devil is by not fighting.
Yeah.
Like that's it's unheard of, and I'm sure it like turned a lot of readers' heads. Like what? Like Daredevil didn't punch Mephisto in the face? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
it's such a wild idea. Yeah,
I mean,
I
I
love.
think it's as long as you're conscious about, I mean, at the time in the 80s, I said, well, I'm going to figure out what this fighting stuff is. And I took karate and I took judo and I
Yeah,
joined a gym and I was boxing at a gym because I wanted to know what does it feel like to be
yeah,
socked in the jaw and
yeah.
kicked in the gut. And, I found out and I didn't like it.
That's funny. I had the same thought. There's a boxing gym down the street from me. I'm like, I should do it. I should sign up. But I'm just like, oh man, I'm 40. Like, I'll die. I'll just die in a ring. I know it. So
That's
I
kind of
avoided it.
one of the fun things of comics. Like, I work on the Marvel Museum, and we're
Yeah, yeah,
working on a new poster for the Marvel Museum and having trouble with one figure because Captain America is kind of high up and Captain America can't fly.
yeah.
So this morning I was out in the back leaping off my porch to figure out where your legs are and where, because your arms will have a lift
Yeah,
and one knee would be up. And then I kept jumping and saying, okay, that's how it'll look like, you know.
yeah,
And I mean, it's one of the fun things in comics. You can learn how to fight in order to write better fight scenes. You,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know,
It's a lot easier now. I'm finding with YouTube. Like, I had to kind of figure
Yeah,
out how a retractable baton works in real life, and you can figure out your fight scenes a
yeah,
lot easier thanks to the internet. Thank God. Earlier talking about John Romita Jr. as like kind of a full on collaborator, and there are issues like the famous The Beer with the Devil issue. He's listed as co-plotter, and I know that was kind of a personal story for you because like you
yeah,
also spent Christmas Eve in like a dive bar, and that's how
yeah,
that came about.
yeah.
So what elements did John bring to that, and what did you bring to that, and how did your working relationship evolve on the title?
I don't really remember that. I mean, in a weird way, I think that writers and artists are always co-authors.
Yeah,
And it's interesting in the my latest comic, The
seeds.
Seeds.
Yeah,
David Aha said it's a drag that writers are listed first, as
yeah,
if they're better. And so we decided to trade off. His name comes first every other issue,
yeah.
and it's like I worked for 10 years in film. You
Hmm.
write the screenplay, but then until the director directs, and so you're both storyboard artists in a weird way.
Yeah,
I'm sending reference and ideas to David Aha. He's jumbling everything up and doing so. In a weird way, I probably should have named as co-author everyone I ever worked with, because it's always been a weird thing. I'm sure I just sent Johnny a normal script.
hmm.
But at the time, he must have added so much to it. I wrote his name in there. I don't really remember what happened. I do.
Was it Marvel style or full script?
I used to write plots that were more like hybrids. All the
Hmm.
dialogue was in there.
Yeah,
So it was because I never understood how is the artist going to, if you don't know what the look on the face is.
yeah.
And then I would rewrite when I got the pages, but all the dialogue would be in there and pretty much panel broken down. So it was kind of a hybrid. Honestly, you'd have to ask Johnny. I don't really remember, but Johnny
Yeah.
is like, just a lot of things, as you know, I wouldn't even have written a story like Daredevil goes to hell and fights Mephisto if I didn't have this incredibly elegant, arc
Yeah.
with.
Yeah.
And John Romita, he came to redesign Mephisto, and then it was like, you know,
It was gorgeous. It was gorgeous. Like every
yeah,
in hell was like just stunning. And Al Williamson was the inker too, and the brushstrokes, like everything about it, just like felt revolutionary to me as a reader. Yeah, it's interesting about the credits because um, I draw Sex Criminals, which is a
yeah, yeah.
comic.
No, I love all your work.
Oh, thanks. The and we made a decision early on to just not list our credits. So
Yeah,
Matt's name is still first, but it doesn't say writer, and mine doesn't say artist or colorist.
yeah.
Because yeah, we found that like putting them in reverse just confuses readers because they're just like,
Everybody, everybody. It's funny because when the Seeds goes on Amazon, it says David Aha, author,
yeah,
and then, because they think he's the author, because
yeah,
you know. But who gives a shit, right?
yeah, yeah. I know. In the end, like,
In the
uh,
end, it's just
yeah,
yeah, it's the impact on the reader. That's really all that matters.
yeah,
I
yeah.
remember,
You have to let it go, like as a
yeah,
creator.
all of it, all of
Yeah.
it. Just let it go, and like there's this funny story. I did all those animal rights issues in Daredevil, and
Hmm.
again, we talked about how we're hustlers and writers are liars and hustlers.
Hmm.
Um, I wrote to a factory farm as if I was a new farmer starting my own farm, and asked for some material about trends in farming. And they sent me back everything that I used in that comic, including, and
Wow.
we're working on a footless pig and a four-winged chicken because of the chicken wing craze. And I'm just reading this gold right from the factory farm, and it all
Oh,
went into the comic. And
that's
to
brilliant.
speak of John Romita again, he, that was his Typhoid was his girlfriend.
Oh,
She
really?
She was based on his girlfriend. And I ran into Johnny at San Diego Con recently, and I started talking about it, and I could see him he just turned white because he was like, she was a nightmare, you know. He prefers to forget all about how Typhoid's inspiration was actually a true nightmare.
Yeah, it might have been even worse if he's like, yeah, well, I married her.
Yeah, I married her.
So the factory farming issue, since you brought it up, like that was a huge one for me as a reader, because I remember like vividly reading it and being horrified by the description of like the pig's legs breaking.
It's all true. It's all
Yeah,
from
that's amazing. And so now in an age of Twitter, like feedback is instantaneous and super direct. But
yeah.
how did feedback on something like that work then? Were you privy to all the letters coming in, or did editorial shield you?
Oh no, nobody shielded us from anything. And the letter, we had a kind of a thing at Marvel, at least in the books I worked on as editor and as writer, is that we would always do a balanced thing. We printed lots of negative letters because we said, okay, let's make sure the letters column, rather than being all like, we're great, it had, I remember, I think there was one letter, I wrote Captain America once, and
oh yeah, that was amazing. That was like the most political issue of all time.
He was like so angry at the media and at the war, and what war would it have been, you know, or you know,
it was Panama. It was invading Panama.
Yeah, it was invading Panama.
Yeah.
It was like, I got letters that said, get the commie off the book, you know? I was like, I forget who my editor was. I was like, oh, we got to print this one, you know? I liked printing bad letters because they're just more fun than and I'm trying to think. There was one notion somebody years later said to me about that story, and they were absolutely right, because the scene has Captain America looks at a newsstand, get angry, and rips up a magazine and stalks off, and the fan said to me, Captain America would have paid the newsstand guy for that. And I went, you're right. You know, like, you're so right.
Yeah, you're off the hook a little bit, because I can tell you, because I just reread it, the newsstand guy goes to give Captain America the magazine.
Oh, he does?
Like, here you go. So your track record's still 100% in your depiction of Captain America. It's funny, I used to work at a newspaper as a writer. And I did a bunch of things for them, like political commentary, and but I also had a stupid advice column that I wrote as well. And one of my favorite things was there was one reader who would tear out my column, write utter garbage on it, and mail it to me. So every once in a while, I get an envelope, I open it up, and just like utter trash, utter garbage, and I'm just like pin it up with the rest.
Nice. I used to have a crazy file. You know, and it was from all because I worked at Prison Life magazine, Covert Action, High Times. I worked at all these kooky magazines, and I used to have a file of just the craziest letters. They were always the best letters.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I think you kind of need an intense reaction on either side for it to be a successful story. Like if everyone just likes it, then you're not doing anything interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's gone over some line now where people troll and kind of like just mess with your head. I don't think that's helpful at all. And I'm a fully formed adult, you know, so I go, you're a troll, bye. But if I was, 20 years old again, just starting out in comics, I think I'd be scared. I think I'd be self-censoring, and scared of trolls. And it's just I worry, about you.
Well, it's funny because my name is a pseudonym.
Yes.
And it was created a long time ago for a variety of reasons. But my advice to almost anyone getting into comics now is do it under a pseudonym. Keep it so separate that like you can actually compartmentalize that a bit. And check out as Chip, go home to your wife as Steve, and like keep it a little Typhoid Mary, I know, but
Of course. It's I have a funny typhoid story about the television show, which I know we're
Oh
supposed
yeah,
to get to, but
yeah.
um, one time someone was interviewing me, and I do all my film and journalism and sort of pseudo literary writing under Annie Nocenti. And all
Hmm.
my magazine work is Annie Nocenti, and all my comics work is Anne.
Yeah.
And somebody was interviewing me once, and they said, "Do you realize that you have the stupidest pseudonym in the entire?"
They'll never catch me.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so funny. The typhoid thing is interesting, and it's the thing I do kind of relate to, having the two pseudonyms, because I adopted the Chip Zdarsky name and persona directly after a divorce.
Oh, okay.
Like, I got divorced and I started to do comics, and I was on the road and I was getting drunk all the time, and it was a character. It was like I could just be this kind of
Oh,
weirdo and then
oh,
go home and I'd just be the normal guy.
oh, cool.
Um, uh, so obviously in your run, Typhoid Mary was pretty huge. Someone kind of being so out of control, but ultimately being in control.
Yeah.
Uh, it was a really a masterclass in writing kind of dueling parts to a person under the guise of dissociative disorder. Um, was Elektra in your mind when you crafted her to introduce a villain love interest, kind of hot on the heels of Elektra? Because it's such a huge swing as a creator. Like, what prompted you to create the
I
character?
mean, I think that I'm a female, so I wrote
What?
as a from
In
a female.
comics?
Yeah, I I wrote from a female's perspective,
Hmm.
and I think that I don't think I ever thought about it at all.
Yeah.
I just wanted to have a strong female in the
Yeah.
comic, and certainly Frank and maybe people before him had established that Matt Murdock is vulnerable to crazy chicks,
Yeah.
you know. And I
Yeah.
think that might have been because when you take over a book, you're supposed to, read the stuff that came before and
Mhm.
respect it and then find your own thing.
Yeah.
So I probably felt justified in having Matt fall in love with a crazy chick because
Mhm.
very few Marvel Comics characters would fall in love with an insane female. You
Yeah.
know, they're
There's sorry, I was going to say there's an added element to it, which is a question I had, where she had the subtle mind control power, and was that always part of the plan? Because to have Matt cheat on Karen was kind of a big deal, and did that just help the readers accept it better?
well, I think the mind control thing was because it was hard to create a character that Daredevil wouldn't know
Hmm.
that Mary was also typhoid and eventually was also Bloody Mary, which I
Yeah.
don't know if he ever met Bloody Mary. I think she came later. She was like the uber feminist who, got lists of men that beat women and beat the men with the exact same wounds.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but the so the two, Mary had to get Matt to fall in love with her, and Typhoid had to get Daredevil to fall in love with her without Daredevil smelling, using his heightened
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
So that's where her like extra powers came from. That came from
Yeah.
wanting to trick him, and then eventually, of course, Kingpin. It was like a really weird six-way romance because then
Yeah.
Kingpin seduced Typhoid into sending everyone who'd ever beaten Daredevil to beat Daredevil again. And then she was like, "Oh, I'm going to take the final job of kicking him off the bridge."
Yeah. Yeah, which is amazing. Like, the idea of doing the title at that point where the main character is just missing,
Yeah.
it just feels liberating. Like, you could take a break from the angst of the character by focusing elsewhere. One of the interesting things during that period was the tie-ins. Like, as a writer, I instinctively shy away from the
Yeah.
crossovers. Like, if given the option, I usually say no. I'm starting to come around to it now, because other writers have pointed out that you're part of this universe and you get the benefits of being part of that universe. You should play into it as well.
Yeah.
Follow the Mutants and Inferno happened during your run,
Yeah.
and produced some of the best work on the book. like Follow the Mutants focusing just on the kind of the street level characters and the blackouts and the kind of violence, while showing glimpses of this, the battle of gods is kind of above. Were those presented to you as an option,
Well,
or is it the kind of thing where you rise to the challenge, like we were saying earlier?
well, actually, because I was editing the X-Men at the time,
Yeah.
the whole Fall of the
Oh yeah.
Mutants, that whole thing came out of me and Chris Claremont, and then we bullied everyone, and then I had to bully myself into.
Yeah.
I had to tie myself down and beat myself into writing a tie-in issue. Now,
Yeah.
I think that one of the fun things about a shared universe, and it is true, we have a kind of a responsibility to that shared universe,
Mhm.
but there are heavy-handed tie-ins that really mess with story.
Yeah.
In this case, we just went up and down the office and said, do you want to play Hell Has Come to Earth?
Yeah.
And you could go as deep, and it's interesting because years later, Scott Snyder wrote a simple email. I was doing Catwoman at the time and all the Bat books. We were part of the Bat family.
Mhm.
And Scott Snyder just wrote a simple email saying, I want the Joker to torture everyone Batman ever loved. And, here's the rules of it. And I think the rules were like, Catwoman has no idea that Batman is actually Joker is actually in love with Batman.
Yeah.
It was something like simple like that. And you can play however you want. And to me, that limited thing, then you find your own angle so that it works for your character.
Mhm.
The heavy-handed ones where you have to play, and there's all this continuity, and they kind of wreck stories because a single issue of a comic is more like a poem. It's not an
Yeah.
opera. So unless you're Walt Simonson, and then it is an opera.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you mentioned poetry because that also brings me back to rereading your run. The language and the flow of the dialogue and the captions is poetic. Like it really feels like poetry. And was poetry an influence on your writing?
Not really, not at
No.
all. I mean, I was friends with some of the beat poets because they were all in New York. I was
Yeah.
friends with Allen Ginsberg and Gregory Corso, and I knew Bill Burroughs, and so maybe, but that was towards the end of my run. So I don't think I was that influenced by poetry. I mean, I can't read my old stories; they seem like the product of an insane person. So, in that poetry might be close to madness, perhaps.
Maybe. Yeah. Maybe that's it. I don't know, but it just it lodges in your head. Like I found, like rereading it. Like a lot of times I'll read comics and there's not really a voice to them.
Yeah.
But your stuff always had a very distinct voice in the cadence of how secondary characters talked, especially.
The only thing I would say to that, it might be naivete, because I entered the business not knowing what a comic was,
Yeah.
really, and learned on the job. And so I think it's a case for bringing people in from other fields, maybe, because I think a lot of that came from just being young and naive and not really knowing what a comic was when I started writing them. So I don't know.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm still naive, so naive. So the TV shows have obviously been influenced by your run. The scenes in Daredevil with Bullseye as Daredevil, and obviously Typhoid Mary showing up in Iron Fist. So what is that like for you as a creator? Did you watch it, or is it a little bit like reading a comic title after you've left it?
I adored the show. I thought the
Yeah.
show was just genius. And I didn't even know that my comics were an influence in Daredevil. Maybe I didn't stick around for the credits to see a thank you, but I'm very flattered if they were an influence, because I think the show is just, and I think that everybody who does Kingpin maybe fed into Kingpin, and especially even when I think about like Bill Sienkiewicz's massive Kingpin. But I was The thing that struck me the most, and you can tell me if this struck you too, is that, we're always used to writing comics using sound effects for the
Yeah.
soundtrack. And when I first saw the Daredevil TV show, you hear all the crunching of bones. And it's like, and I'm like, no, Daredevil would, he's basically humane. He wouldn't hit that hard. And then I'm thinking, what am I thinking? Because it's like
Yeah.
the soundtrack was gruesome.
Yeah. Very visceral.
It was very visceral. It was the real sound of what a real fight would sound like. And I think it's because we're deprived of soundtracks. It was startling to hear the crunching of bones. I mean, I basically, every time he fought someone, I thought, they can't be alive.
Yeah, I know. And I think also comics, because of the static nature of them as well. Like if the Daredevil TV show was just like static frames that would show you, then it would feel much different. Like myself also, like I play video games. I was playing the Spider-Man game, and I talked to other writers about it. I'm just like, it feels like he's murdering these people.
Yeah.
Like there's no way anyone's going to survive any of this. It's the magic of comics.
That's the amazing thing about sound effects, is that no matter how big they are, they read quietly.
Yeah.
Like you can put crack-a-doom and all kinds of Kirby, stuff like Walt, one of my favorite time favorites, does, and still it reads on a strange way. It reads quiet.
Yeah, it really does. What's your favorite sound effect to put in a comic?
Well, it's funny because, of course, we all sit there and scribble away and try and, which vowel. I don't know if I took out the vowel, and then sometimes I'll just go, oh, what are you doing getting so precious? Let's go back to the classic, and use a good old Walt Simonson crack-a-doom,
I hate writing bang for a gun, because it's just like, it's such a literal translation, but sometimes it's what you need. I always loved the sound FAP, F-A-P.
Oh, beautiful sound.
Which has been used a lot in Daredevil, and they won't let me use it anymore because it's another term for masturbation.
What is the phrase again? What are the letters?
FAP, F-A-P. Yeah.
When?
I know, and I always try to get it in because it's a great.
Why do you use whack instead?
Exactly. These are the limitations I have now. It's horrible.
Oh man, that's censorship.
So when John Romita Jr. left the book, in the interview I read with him, it sounds like he was kind of like a bit of a good soldier with Marvel. Like if they said you're going to this title, he would just go to that title. And so it feels like he was maybe removed to work on the Daredevil graphic novel or X-Men or something like that.
I don't remember at the time, but it was 100% amicable. It was probably like he came in and said, I feel like doing this. And Ralph went, no, I'll have to find a new artist. And then Ralph found an artist. It was all very happy. There wasn't any, there was no friction.
No. So I mean, there were only a few more issues after he left. Lee Weeks, Kieran Dwyer filled in. But how did the decision come about for you to leave the title? Was it your decision or their decision? I've had both happen to me.
That what?
I've had both happen to me, so I'm always interested.
Well, I think that I remember the storyline. I haven't read those issues in so long, but I think the storyline was involving like a mixed race girl, and I wanted her to eventually. She was like a street activist, protester, mixed race girl, and I wanted her to be Daredevil's new love interest. And I don't think Marvel was quite ready for that or something. I remember there people were sort of like, "Oh, you can't really make her his love interest," and I was like, "Why not?" And I think maybe it was like the stories were getting tiresome to me, and everybody was ready. I think it was just a mutual, that's good. That's done.
Yeah, because it felt like the end of that run was the end of the story. Like it felt very full circle, like bringing him back to New York and kind of rediscovering who he was, and meeting that young woman, Nyla, I think her name was.
She was going to be his love interest, and I think that I vaguely remember that people weren't really quite ready for him to have a mixed race girlfriend, honestly. You
Yeah.
know,
So weird to even think that
I
that's
know
an
I didn't
issue.
think that, but it was sort of like, okay, well, why not?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you seem to bring over a lot of the themes you were exploring in Daredevil onto Kid Eternity afterwards with Sean Phillips,
Yeah.
which myself as a reader following to that was just perfect.
Well, I mean, Sean is a genius.
Oh
He's
God,
like, he's up there with like, the best of the best. And again, those are comics I can't really read. They seem like they were written by a crazy person. And I think what was happening was, it's like I was finally getting to do whatever I wanted without any constraints, and
yeah,
I went a little like maybe off my rocker, you
yeah,
know.
yeah. They Kid Eternity reads like a fever dream. Like it's
It's a fever
really
dream.
engaging, but yeah, I get that.
It's a total fever dream. It lacks logic, and it's dream logic. I don't know. I went nuts. What can I say? May we all have a chance to go nuts in comics.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly. Yeah,
'Cause
for
even if
sure.
you hated it, you go, "Oh, gee, you can do that in a comic." Yeah.
Well, I think I've exhausted my 10 questions, but I have a bonus one, um, which is that you got to work with Steve Ditko on an issue
Yes.
of Daredevil, which is amazing. Do you have any recollections of working with him, either as an editor or as a writer?
Well, Steve used to come into the office, and Steve really liked Ralph's office, and he was always sitting in Ralph's office. And you'd come in, and as long as you didn't talk about comics, Steve was happy.
Yeah,
It was mostly his ideas on anarchy, and all this, his political ideas.
yeah,
I didn't really want to talk about comics, and so then I think maybe he felt safe with me because I wasn't going to talk about comics, and he started visiting my office.
yeah.
And I don't remember how that came up. I think back then Marvel had a thing that if you were a Marvel artist and you needed work, they would assign you what was called a fill-in,
Hmm.
just to put food on the table for that particular artist. And Steve needed a gig, and Ralph said, Annie, write him a Daredevil story, and we'll use it as a fill-in.
Yeah.
And the only thing I remember was that I said, Steve, what do you want to draw? And I think he picked the villain. Who was it? The owl, maybe.
The owl, yeah.
Yeah, it was. He wanted to do the owl, and then I said, "Well, what do anything else?" And he said that he had this idea of walking around Manhattan and not knowing which shopping bag had a bomb in it. Which
Oh,
is like
great.
an incredibly prescient thought,
Yeah.
in terms of like later terrorism, whatever.
Yeah, no kidding. Wow.
And who doesn't say when Steve, that sounds exciting, you know? And so, I mean, it was really, that's another issue of Daredevil that should have had Steve Ditko co-author on it, because I'm pretty sure that came out of his head.
Yeah, well, I mean, considering his history with Spider-Man and how
Yeah,
much he put into that, like I think he probably put a lot more into that than he did into your Daredevil issue.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, the getting back to the TV show,
Mhm.
I find it really exciting to see, like when Typhoid came into Iron Fist, I was like so excited that she was going to make it into the Daredevil show. And I guess they might have had plans for that, but I was at San Diego Comic-Con, and I had a meeting with the head of Marvel themed entertainment about the museum we do
Yeah.
for Marvel. And the executive had a meeting in the Marvel tent, you know,
Hmm.
and they said, you can't go in. You can't go in the tent. He got all huffy, and he's like, what do you mean? We have an important meeting, and we've reserved the tent. And he said, oh, no, there's someone in there that, and they need their privacy. And so I went, let's just sit on the floor. Like we did. And so we just plopped down on the floor, and we were like listening, and there was all this screaming. And it was the actress that plays Typhoid Mary announcing that she was going to be in the TV show. And I was just sitting there going, yeah, I'm not allowed in that tent.
Wow, you just summed up comics and pop culture perfectly. Oh man.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering how you feel like how long do you have to be not actively working on a character before you can read or watch or listen to stories featuring that character?
I mean, I'm pretty much of a people should be able to do whatever the hell they want with characters
Hmm.
within, there I use the metaphor of a rubber band. You give me a rubber band and that rubber band's name is Daredevil. I'm going to stretch it as far as I can,
Hmm.
and then he's going to snap back to shape. I mean,
Yeah,
Daredevil, he's my favorite character because to me he's an endless story generator
yeah,
because he has the built-in conflicts. I believe in the law and I use my fists. I relapse Catholic. I wear the devil suit. So
yeah,
there's another one that I'm forgetting, like a few other conflicts. I mean,
yeah.
you can write Daredevil on and on and on. You can stretch him, and he
Hmm.
snaps back to shape. I
Yeah,
mean, I think that especially back then, because that was before the IP, the IP was so valuable.
yeah.
So now, understandably, the Marvel and DC have a tighter rein on what are the terms they use, like off model. Everything has
Yeah.
to be on model. Oh, you can't do that there. I mean, most of my run on Daredevil, I have a feeling, they would say you can't bring him to hell. You can't, do this and that. So
Yeah, it's interesting because like when I got the job writing Daredevil, I was at the Marvel offices and I was kind of pitching it to a room of writers and editors. And afterwards, Joe Quesada introduced me to Eric, who is the showrunner on Daredevil. And I made some joke. I'm going to turn it into a romantic comedy, haha, of course. And and I kind of realized at that moment that there were too many eyes on the book,
yeah,
like
yeah,
because everything I knew that the outline I had to be passed up the chain,
yeah,
and get in front of a lot of executives, and I was really nervous, like I'd have to fight for everything. And then it's unfortunate because like then they announced that the show wasn't coming back,
aw,
and I was like, oh, I felt bad because I enjoyed the show, and also, hey, maybe they would have picked up some of my threads, but
yeah,
also a weight was taken off. Like I felt like I
yeah.
could just kind of do
A
whatever
big
I
one.
wanted.
I mean, there's really something to. That's why after I did Catwoman for DC, and Dan DiDio called me and said, "All right, I'd like you to do Katana next, and then I want you to do Clarion." And I was like, "Oh boy, two characters no one cares about," because when you're given an assignment and no one cares about
Yeah.
Clarion, the Witch Boy. I was like, "Yes, I can write a comic no one cares about." I don't want to go near
No.
the big comics
No,
because
it's kind of those are my dream projects. Like whenever an editor asks me what I want to work on, I'm just like, yeah, you tell me who's your D-list character
yeah,
that needs a writer. Like,
who does no one give a shit about? And it's interesting because I'm writing an essay now about Captain America for Marvel,
okay,
and it's interesting because there was I have not read Captain America comics in years, but
yeah,
I stumbled on a controversy that how could he hail Hydra, and
yeah,
it's sort of like I do think that every time you stretch a character somewhere he doesn't really want to go, you learn more about the character.
yeah,
As long as you return the toy to the sandbox the same way you found it, we can stretch these characters. And I don't think they should be so heavy handed about the, off model look and the, you know,
yeah. It's hard in an age of kind of instantaneous gratification,
hmm
to have in mind as a reader or a viewer that there's a longer story in play. That like
yeah,
the
there's
the
a,
shock
yeah,
ending of an issue where Daredevil murders somebody. It's like,
exactly.
oh well, we have a story. Don't worry. Like we don't
Yeah.
need all the tweets saying how could you do this.
How could you do this? Yeah, and the other thing about Captain America, and it's only because I'm working on an essay
Hmm.
now, is because is he is he Captain America or is he an echo of the times we live in? Is he a
Yeah,
myth? Is he the myth or the man? Is he the flag or the man? So you can play with storylines like that. I didn't read the controversial Hail Hydra story, but
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
and in spirit, I thought even if this person's politics are the opposite of mine, you know, you know, as long as it's an intelligently done story that stretches the character and reveals more about the character,
Hmm.
then I think you can go for it.
You were amazing on Daredevil in terms of not necessarily showing both sides of a thing, but putting a bit of doubt in the reader's head as to who's correct in a situation.
Hmm.
You know, it was very obvious that the pig farmer was the bad guy there,
Yeah.
but his daughter also like relied on his money to
Yeah.
orchestrate her plan, things like that. Um,
Basically, everyone's a hypocrite.
well, yeah, there's like almost your entire run is kind of about that, like the duality within everyone and
But also,
hypocrisy.
I'm a hypocrite because,
We all are, yeah.
in the seeds, recently in the seeds. So my grandfather was a farmer. So
Hmm.
farmers keep showing up in my work. And in the seeds, there's a farmer who has a moment. He's supposed to kill, he's got to kill his pig,
Hmm.
who's been really good to him with 16 litters or something.
Yeah.
And he's got to kill the pig. And the reason I say I'm a hypocrite is because for years, kids would come up to me at conventions and say, "Oh, I read those animal rights stories and I never ate meat again." And I'd be like, "Let me put this hot dog behind my back,"
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
But
You-
about now, today, these days, I can't remember the last time I ate meat
yeah.
because now it's suddenly really magnified that there's something wrong with the
Hmm.
farming industry with the so so even if I was a hypocrite back in the 80s when I was writing those animal rights
Yeah,
stories,
yeah, yeah.
you know.
But it's still, I mean, it's not necessarily, it doesn't have to necessarily be your beliefs to be able to write about them.
Yeah.
And that's the interesting thing with a main character like Matt Murdock and Daredevil, um, because a lot of writers will write the main character as a substitution for themselves, but
Yeah.
he never quite felt that way. And I was thinking about how he related to the various characters, like Brandy, who was like the feminist vegan, and then Number Nine, who was like the subservient, genetically bred, perfect woman.
Yeah.
And he would just kind of come down in the middle of them. And he'd be like, "Oh yeah, Number Nine's happy. She's happy serving me dinner. Like, who am I to
Yeah.
say?" Like,
Yeah. Who am
um,
I? Yeah.
so
Although
did you?
I did have fun once having Typhoid Mary torture Mary Jane. She basically went into Mary Jane's home knowing Mary Jane was waiting for Peter Parker to come home, and she just threw like a fit and threw all Mary Jane's female
Yeah,
accoutrements like her blender and her this and her that around the room, like, and really went, it was basically, I guess it was a feminist scene,
yeah.
it was basically, it was fun to have Typhoid torture Mary Jane.
Oh yeah, yeah. Living vicariously through the characters. But with someone like Matt Murdock, like who did you base him and his outlook on anyone, either within fiction or in your life?
Well, I think that we all know that everything is autobiographical.
Yeah.
So even when you're writing a villain, you're trying to say, well, the villain doesn't really know he's evil.
Hmm.
He's got a whole logic worked out in his head. A
Yeah.
villain never says, "Gee, I'm evil."
Yeah.
So, I think that, and my brother is a lawyer. My brother
Hmm.
was Mario Cuomo with Cuomo's office, and then he was one of Spitzer's raiders. He's a kind of a really amazing. He's done all forms of law, and so I would write the legal teams, and then the themes and cases, and I'd shoot them over to my brother,
Yeah.
and he would tell me, So then I actually did. I put my brother in the comic.
Oh.
David is the guy that runs Matt's legal aid
Yeah.
clinic, and it's my brother because my brother plays basketball and makes bad jokes. So in those scenes, that's my brother. But I think some of my brother went in because my brother is like, um, he's a heroic figure in my mind. He's like
Hmm.
just a really wonderful human who always knows where right is. So I think
Yeah.
maybe a little bit my brother, a little bit myself,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, that's awesome. I feel like I've taken up way too much of your time, and they're going to have trouble editing this down to the 10
Okay.
questions. But um, uh, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for joining me for this.
Well, and I think for the audience for this, I mean, Daredevil, my favorite character. Chip
Yeah.
is
Same.
writing a brilliant run, so you should go
Oh,
read it. And yes, we have to save Daredevil anyway. Wait, why don't we kidnap that executive in charge? And you know,
yeah, there you go. That'll do it. And then Matt Murdock will get them out of jail afterwards.
oh,
There
I
you go.
see. You're Matt in court, and I'm Daredevil.
Daredevil. That makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. All right, Annie. Thank you very much for this.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thank you.
Awesome.
Bye. Bye,
All right.
everyone.
Bye.